two, this idea that they should only be on one protein is like the worst thing you could possibly do. Puppies need more variety even than adults do because they need those extra resources from all the different proteins and all the different whole foods. You want to rotate actually more the whole foods than you would even an adult. Adults, you can kind of spread it out in the balance over time approach. With puppies, it needs to be very frequent switching up and a lot of variety to make sure that they are getting adequate resources. Welcome to another episode of the Crunchy Carnivore Podcast. I am Melissa Weidenhammer, natural ring breeder and certified canine nutritionist, and I am here with holistic veterinarian, Dr. Jessica Levy. Today, we are going to be talking about your naturally reared puppy, also known as NR. And once you get into this world a little bit, if you ever see the term NR as a acronym, that's what we're talking about, naturally reared, which is basically a little bit more of us being very specific, getting away from just the holistic word as a buzzword. We're being very specific with what we mean when we say that. So we really want to get people familiar with the term naturally reared or NR because it is a lot more specific.
Yeah, it's more than just raw feeding.
Yes, or choosing non-toxic things.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it is a lifestyle for sure. So we want to kind of just touch on some different things. If you're new to kind of the natural approach, or maybe you've done a little bit of in the past, or you do it with your adult dogs, but you've never had a puppy with this method, we want to touch on kind of what that looks like so that you're best equipped and ready to naturally rear your puppy.
Exactly. Okay, so, it really starts, so like last time we talked about choosing a puppy, finding the right breeder, et cetera, this is about like once you bring the puppy home. So now you've got the puppy at home, where are you going to start with this puppy?
Right.
So ideally you should already have some raw food in your freezer, at least a little bit, so that you are ready to go when your puppy hits the ground at your home. I know that I've heard all sorts of things where people say, don't raw feed your puppy for the first 6 months, or only feed one protein for the first year. And those things are not good guidelines towards a healthy puppy. You want to go raw with that puppy as fast as you possibly can. When I bring dogs home, whether they're older, younger, little puppies, it doesn't matter. I don't feed kibble at my house. I will not feed kibble. I don't feed canned food. We're going raw immediately. And so it's okay to do that. And that's something that you might do like as you gain more confidence with it, but it's okay to do if you're wondering what you should feed. Like, what about the night that you get the puppy home? What about for the first couple of weeks? Should you do a transition? How long should it be? And the answer is just feed raw.
Now, I will say, if you bring that puppy home and maybe you didn't get that puppy from a natural rearing breeder and certain things have happened with the puppy of a more traditional way, they can be struggling a little bit. There's also a big adjustment period. So stress can cause certain things. So if you're seeing loose stool, if they're vomiting, there's all sorts of little things that you can be seeing. You may need to give the puppy a little bit of digestive support. So it's really good to have those things on hand. We cover that really well in our raw feeding guide, what you should have on hand for gut support to help a puppy or a dog transition to raw. Most puppies will transition very easily because their gut has not been compromised for a very long time with kibble. But sometimes, it's just always good to have that digestive support on hand, whether you're wanting to give them some extra support in getting them on raw food, or if they're struggling with things even a little bit down the line, you want to hit the gut health first as treatment. And so it's just really good to have those things on hand. Right. You can see that in our free guide. We've got our transition guide, which gives the gut supplements and things like that. Also, if you get our raw feeding guide, you're going to find those things in there. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then two, this idea that they should only be on one protein is like the worst thing you could possibly do. Puppies need more variety even than adults do because they need those extra resources from all the different proteins and all the different whole foods. You want to rotate actually more the whole foods than you would even an adult. Adults, you can kind of spread it out in the balance over time approach. With puppies, it needs to be very frequent switching up and a lot of variety to make sure that they are getting adequate resources.
Right. And so with an adult dog, there might be other considerations, like maybe they're older, or maybe there's some disease going on. There might be a reason why you would do a slower transition of food or use specific supplements for a dog of a certain age. With puppies, really want to start with standard process canine enteric support, standard process canine immune system support. Have those supplements on your shelf by the time you bring the puppy home. Start them ASAP. Giving a digestive enzyme and or probiotic is never, giving a digestive enzyme that may or may not include a probiotic is always a good idea. But you do want to make the change as fast as possible. Also, there's going to be a settling in period. And so, sometimes people get a new puppy and the next day they're at the soccer game with their kids or taking the puppy to the family reunion. It is going to be a shock to their system. If your child moved into some other family's home, they would be in a state of shock at first. And so even with a naturally reared puppy, the smells are different, the people are different, the sounds are different. And so there is kind of a settling in period that you want to give them time for. So even though the puppy that I got earlier this fall was naturally reared, for the most part, barring a little bit of kibble. But even so, at first, and even though I have other dogs, he did seem very confused, didn't sleep well at first, had a little bit of diarrhea, vomited once. And so these are not necessarily things to panic about. I did pay attention to them. So I did watch to see if it was going to happen again. And he really did seem like kind of half out to lunch and half out at sea for the first couple of weeks. And then he started to feel more confident. But since I was aware of that, we're going to talk about training a little bit later, but give things time. Let the puppy be with your family, with the people that he needs to bond with for at least those first couple of weeks without venturing out too much. You want him to start to feel comfortable in the home environment. Waylon wouldn't even take treats at first. I was trying to coax him to get in his kennel or whatever, because he was kind of so shell-shocked. And that's okay. It's not something to freak out about or to say, let me try this other treat, let me try this. Just be aware that if the puppy's looking at you with wide eyes, like, I don't recognize you, they don't know you. Give them time to settle in. Give them as much attention, but kind of, quiet attention along with playtime as possible. I know too, like if you get a puppy from a breeder who's not a natural rearing breeder, there are probably some things you're going to have to deal with. So they've been fed processed food. Maybe they've had a vaccine here and there. Maybe they've had some chemical deworming. And so there was, I think we were talking about it on the Holistic Dog Health Summit about the need to then detox. Don't dive into that just yet. Just let the puppy settle in, get used to their new place, get used to their new food, get used to, and you may find, because I know I've had to do this with a couple of my young dogs, where you might have to fiddle around and say, where do I have to put the kennel so that he sleeps better? Do I need a different type of kennel? Is a lot of young puppies, I think, seem to be very hot. And so maybe they need to be in a place that's kind of better airflow rather than in a corner of the bedroom where it's maybe stuffy. So there's a lot of fiddling around within those first couple of weeks to figure out what is going to work for everybody. And then something that we talked about briefly is making sure that the puppy's a good fit for your family.
I think especially if you put a lot of time and effort in doing the prep work, kind of like what we talked about in our last episode, the assumption is this puppy is going to come home and they're part of your family forever. As much as that's what we all want, and that's the desire and that's the intention, there are certain things that happen that can come up anywhere from, the puppy doesn't respond well to your children, or, there's the puppy's temperament isn't quite right, or maybe something happens that you didn't foresee and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can raise a puppy while our family goes through this right now.
Right, like some sort of family emergency. Those happen too. So
yep. So there's definitely, leave yourself open a little bit to that idea that, let's give it the first, 2 to 3 weeks. How is this puppy settling in? What is going on? Is this going to be, the long-term situation that you were hoping that it was going to be, or maybe we need to pivot and do something else?
as a breeder, did you ever have that happen where you sold a puppy to somebody and everything seemed really solid, and then at the last minute or a week before it just didn't work out? Or
Never early on. I had one situation where it was a bad fit, and it wasn't until 7 or 8 months in that it was like, oh, okay, this is not what we thought it was going to be. And then I was very instrumental in helping find a new home for that puppy that was a better fit for him. Pretty much every time. But we did a lot on the front end we did temperament testing. We interviewed every family to make sure, we did a lot to guide the pairing of the puppy with the family. And I think that made a huge difference. And with my breed in particular, temperament is of paramount importance. It's super important. If you get the temperament wrong, it doesn't matter how cute you think that puppy is. If it's the wrong temperament, it's the wrong temperament. And so I was just extra about that, especially because of the breed that I had. So we were very successful with our pairings almost all of the time.
I think it was when I was at Scout's breeder's house picking him up. He was 4 years old and he had been returned to the breeder because of health problems and temperament issues. And that day she had somebody who was scheduled to come pick up a young puppy from a litter to take home. And there was a death in the family. And they just literally had to cancel at the last minute. So whatever it was a big enough disruption in the family that they just could not even fathom. The day before, they were all on board, had everything ready, and then the day that they were supposed to pick up the puppy, there was a death, and they just had to jettison the whole idea. So things can happen it can be completely unanticipated. So we talked a little bit about detoxification and how to think about detoxification when you get your puppy home. But right now we're talking about kind of in that immediate period, don't do it. Just let it go while your puppy is settling in and kind of becoming a member of the family, learning the boundaries, learning where they're going to sleep at night, and all those kinds of things.
Getting acclimated to the food. So, not that, every situation is different, but really, if we had to give a benchmark, 3 to 4 weeks, just let things settle. Let things, let there become a rhythm. Let the puppy get used to all the things and work out all the things, whether they're detoxing from something from before and they got to work some stuff out of their system, or just getting used to that rotation, or maybe you're feeding a different raw food than the breeder was feeding. And there's so many different things like that, and allowing them to just settle in and bond with you before you throw in a detox or do a ton of training, or just let that adjustment period happen. And so that's kind of, if we had to give a time frame, at least 3 to 4 weeks, just let the puppy kind of settle in.
Yeah, and they're probably going to, especially if they're younger, they're probably going to sleep a lot at first. It's very stressful to make this kind of a change. It was something that Nicole had posted on Instagram, where she said that in the afternoon, when puppies typically get very wound up and turn into piranhas, like little biting machines that you can't shut off, that means that they need a nap. And so this is literally what happened with Waylon. He would get totally wild in the afternoon. I would put him in his kennel. He would holler and kind of, shake the cage at first. And then he would fall asleep eventually. And he just really needed that quiet time. Now, I feel like he's a child. Now that he's 5 months old, we're letting him stay up a little bit later. But I still put him to bed between 8:30 and 9. He's kind of ready to go. Previously, it was 7 o'clock. you're in your kennel, you're expected to go to sleep. I mean, if one of us is awake in the middle of the night and I hear him whine or whimper or something like that, we will let him out to go potty. But yeah, so you can kind of set those parameters, even though you might want to just hold your little puppy forever. But that is also a little bit stressful for them. So they do need some time just in the kennel by themselves.
Yeah. So just to kind of piggyback on that, a lot of people will assume, if the puppy's like seems like they have a ton of energy and they're just wound up and ready to go, and it's a little bit later in the day. We kind of have this little checklist because it's also kind of the biting, the biting time when they get really bitey. And so if they get super wired, they've been up for a little while, they get super wired and they kind of are like out of their mind a little bit. That doesn't mean they need to play more. That doesn't mean they need more of an outlet. They need more exercise. It probably means they need a nap. And the recommendation I would always give my puppy families is if you've done training and they've had, their good outlet and they're eating well, and then you've given them a nap and they wake up and they're still bitey, give them some fat and something to chew on. They're hangry is what that is. So it gives them an outlet of chewing, but then also getting that fat into them is going to satiate them. And I know we'll talk about fat in a little bit, but that's just kind of a little, when you're seeing that it's wired tired, it's not because they need to play more.
Right. Yeah. And often it's when the kids start complaining about the puppy, like, Mom, he won't stop biting me. Like, yes, that's your signal.
Yep. As we go through, now let's just kind of talk a little bit more about diet, because that's a huge part of raising a puppy well, is to make sure that you're feeding them a raw, fresh food diet. And so a lot of people are unsure about how to feed a puppy raw, or what the special, considerations are. And so we'll just touch on that a little bit before we get to some other things. Basically, a puppy should be able to eat a raw diet just like an adult dog should be able to eat a raw diet. You're certainly going to feed them more of a percentage than you're going to feed an adult. So an adult is going to eat raw, that's eating raw, is going to be anywhere from 1.5% to 3% of their body weight. There's considerations, and we could talk about how you determine what that is. But for the sake of this conversation, that gives you an idea. Puppies start out when they're, 6-8 weeks old, and for a little while, they're on 10%. They're eating about 10% of their body weight, which they're smaller usually, so it's not like you're not having to feed a ton of food, but for their size, it is a lot compared to what you would feed an adult. And then as you're gonna go through that first year, that first 6 months, you'll kind of be they'll be growing in their body weight, and then you'll kind of get to places where you'll drop the percentage a little bit, because now they're bigger. So if you kept feeding 10%, as this puppy is growing so much, I mean, the amount of food would be crazy.
Not only that, and the puppy would be obese.
And the puppy would be obese, and they probably wouldn't even be able to eat everything you offered them anyway.
Correct.
So, once they hit a certain age, you're going to drop a couple of percent of their body weight as you're checking their weight. In the beginning, when they're growing faster, you're going to want to check their weight probably every couple weeks, because it does, when they go through growth spurts, it changes really fast. As they get older, I think it's around 6 or 7 months, that growth rate is going to slow way down. And so you're not going to need to weigh them as often, and you're also not going to need to feed them as much. So your percentage of their body weight that you're feeding every day is going to be dropping. I will also say puppies start out eating 3 to 4 times a day. Very quickly, though, in our experience, it drops to twice a day. By the time they're 12 to 14 weeks old, they're going to start not wanting to eat that frequently. And also, it's good to space out that food if you're doing training and you're feeding a lot of treats. You want them to be food motivated. If they're full all the time, they are going to care less about your treats. So just know that, like, the feeding, 3 to 4 times a day is probably going to drop off within the first 3 months to about twice a day. And then you kind of space those apart, and then you've kind of got your training period in between where they're a little more food motivated and you can kind of do those treats. And then, keeping in mind too, by the time they hit 9 months to a year old, our girls, they would just drop off around 9 months. They only wanted to eat once a day. I would offer, and they're like, they don't want food in the morning.
Yeah, and actually literally last weekend, so Waylon is 5 months, coming up on 6 months pretty quickly. And last weekend, I just dropped him down to once a day like our other dogs. I mean, he would happily eat all the time, which is kind of what you want in a puppy. Like, you want that food motivation.
Oh, it's so much easier to do things.
Yeah, but they don't need to eat all the time. And so when he seemed like he's in good body condition, when he seemed like it would be easy for him to skip breakfast, we just started skipping it. Now, he still gets treats in the morning to go in his crate. So he goes in his crate sometimes while I take a shower, or, you know, certainly if I leave for work, and I will just always use treats to get the dog in the crate because it's the easiest thing on the planet. You know, now that he's over 40 pounds, I don't want to have to argue with him or wrestle with him. Throw a treat in the kennel, goes right in. And then, you know, if there's snacks that happen during the morning, he can have those as well. But his actual meal time is just once a day at this point.
So your ultimate goal is once they kind of reach that point where they're not really wanting to eat twice a day, is to only feed once a day. For sure, by the time they're a year old, for sure, they should only be needing to eat once a day. That is kind of your step toward intermittent fasting. It probably is not as long as it should be to truly intermittently fast them, which is incredibly beneficial for their health. But once a day, it certainly is far easier and better on their digestive system than to feed multiple times a day. So that's the recommendation that we have at this time for an adult. Never, ever, ever, ever fast a puppy though. So my question to you, Dr. Levy, now that we're talking about this, a lot of times when you're having a challenge, there's diarrhea, there's throwing up, there's whatever. I know for adult dogs, you're like, stop putting stuff in their stomach, right? So you are supposed to fast them as you help, you know, hopefully are rectifying the situation, letting things move through, administering remedies, whatever it is. But when you can't fast a puppy, if they're having those kind of challenges, is that something where you wouldn't fast them, but maybe you would just do like raw goat milk or something like that? Or what would you suggest there?
Right, then you just simplify the diet. So maybe they just eat plain raw grass-fed hamburger.
Okay.
Or maybe they just get some raw goat's milk to tide them over.
Okay, so you're not necessarily doing the bone and the organ, you know, just some sort of like an animal protein without that.
Because people always think that, you know, maybe canned food will be easier or cooked food will be easier, and I still would not cook the hamburger. But sometimes just simplifying the diet, taking the supplements out, putting them on hold for a couple of days, letting the situation iron itself out.
Okay.
And it kind of depends on how serious the condition is. Obviously, you might end up at urgent care. You might end up at the ER. But when, you know, if the puppy kind of, you know, just skips a step where one day they're maybe not as energetic, they barf a little bit, they don't want to eat, it's okay to, you know, skip a meal, but then I would, you know, just maybe lighten the load on their digestive system a little bit.
Okay, very good. And so let's move to so we talked about feeding amounts and kind of schedules, but now let's talk about some of the special considerations for a puppy's raw diet, because they do need extra of certain things, not necessarily different than adults, just more of certain things to make sure that that the musculoskeletal system is getting what it needs, all that calcium and phosphorus and things like that, so that it can grow appropriately. And so, Dr. Levy, do you want to just kind of share some of the top special considerations for the raw diet for the puppy?
And so one of the concerns, which is much more of a concern when you're feeding dry food, right? But why in the land of dry and canned food, why are there puppy foods versus in the wild, nobody is making puppy rabbits? You know what I mean? The puppies are going to have to eat what the adults are eating because that's what food is made of. And a lot of that is concern over the calcium phosphorus ratio and the worry that if you feed too much calcium or too much phosphorus, you'll upset the balance, and then it can lead to developmental disorders. Things like osteochondrosis dissecans or curvature of the limbs, things like that. And so that's where raw bones will never steer you wrong. So raw bones have the perfect proportion that nature intended of calcium to phosphorus. Now we're talking about raw bones that your puppy can consume. So these are, we call them edible raw bones versus like a, you know, beef femur that they're not actually going to be able to eat the bone of. And so feeding fairly decent amounts, like maybe at least half the diet as raw edible bones, is really beneficial. Because we want our puppies to grow up big and strong. We want them to grow up without hip dysplasia. We want them to grow up without elbow dysplasia. And so as much as we can control the diet at that stage, that will benefit them in the long run. Essentially, nature is not going to steer you wrong. The natural calcium phosphorus ratio that exists in raw bones is the perfect thing for them. If you have a very small puppy, then you have more of a challenge. You're going to have to find what kind of bones are small enough that my puppy can eat them. And so it might be a matter of maybe take a chicken neck, put it in a Ziploc baggie, and smash it up with a hammer. Or take a chicken wing and get out your poultry shears and snip it into smaller pieces. So you might need to do that, whereas, maybe with a Labrador Retriever puppy, you don't have to do those things. But even very small puppies are capable of eating bones. You do have to, you want to watch them at first, make sure that they're chewing the bone and not trying to swallow it whole. When you have dogs with funny shaped faces, like pugs or English bulldogs or Frenchies, their teeth are way out on the sides of their mouths. And so they have to figure out, how am I going to use my tongue to move this piece of bone over so where it's in between my teeth? And that's something that they just have to figure out. And so if you're nervous about feeding bones, or if you're looking at, at some point, even like a little tiny miniature chicken drumstick starts to look like a piece of rebar, and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I want to do this. Smash it into pieces first. Chop it up. And that will at least alleviate your anxiety. The puppy's still going to get the benefit of eating the raw bones, and they'll figure out how to eat them, right? Because at first, when the mother dog is feeding the puppies, she's going to go out and eat a bunny and chew it up to some extent and pre-digest it on the way home, and then come up and regurgitate it for the puppies. And that is what puppies eat in the wild, as they're transitioning off of nursing to become the hunters that they're going to need to be in order to sustain themselves.
So a couple of other foods that are incredibly beneficial, and they're rotated in with our raw feeding guide when we show you how to feed raw, that also have the perfect balance between calcium and phosphorus, is going to be grass-fed green tripe and raw goat's milk. Those are two of our favorite foods to add into a raw diet. And so if you give a good variety of the grass-fed green tripe, raw meaty bones, and that raw goat milk, if that's in your rotation and you're offering some form of that calcium each and every day to a certain extent, the puppy is going to have excellent access to that calcium in a very bioavailable way that is in the perfect ratio, and you're not going to have to worry about, are they getting too much calcium? Are they getting too little calcium? Nature is wonderful in how it balances out food for dogs.
Right, and so what that means is that 80-10-10 blend, which is how a lot of pre-mixed raw food comes. So that's 80% meat, 10% bone, 10% organ. That 10% bone is not usually enough for that young growing puppy. You can still use that food, but the other half of their meal needs to be made up of raw edible bones. And edible bones just means bones that they're able to bite down into and actually consume. So it could be turkey tails, it could be duck wings or duck heads, it could be quail frames, anything like that that the dog can actually eat. You need to supply that along with your 80-10-10 blend.
The next thing that we can talk about, so now we've kind of got our calcium and phosphorus taken care of, is that puppies need fat. This is something I think that people get a little too scared of. Usually you're not going to make a puppy obese by giving them fat. It is a much better form of energy than starch or carbohydrates, which is what you're going to find in kibble. That's not going to weigh them down with extra weight on their body. They're going to be able to utilize that. It allows them to, again, feel satiated. Brain development can happen with fat. Not to mention there's a lot of fat soluble vitamins that they need to be able to use. They need fat to be able to use that. And so I definitely, recommend people do more fat than maybe somebody else would, because I just feel like it does way more good than it could do harm. I think you would have to feed a tremendous amount of fat for it to really be a problem.
Right.
But I mean, as far as puppies go, like when they're going through these stages, especially if they're really bitey, like a really good marrow bone, that marrow that's in there is great. So tallow is great. Grass-fed ghee is a great option. You could do, if your puppy's tummy is okay with it, you could do full fat Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. There's a lot of good fats out there that you can implement into their diet, so that you make sure that all of those different needs are being taken care of for the puppy.
Right. Correct. Okay, so then there's other things to think about when you have a young growing puppy in your home. So like Melissa said, pay attention to how old they are. At some point, somewhere between 5 and 7 months, the growth rate's going to slow. Like at first, you bring the puppy home and they're this big, and then 2 weeks later they've doubled in size, and yes, that's what happens. But that growth rate, I think of it as like the logarithmic growth rate. That is going to slow and almost come to a stop. Your puppy will still be growing. They're still going to grow until they're 2.5 or 3 years old. It's just going to be much less noticeable. So once they finish that fast growth phase, then every now and then you look at your dog and you're like, oh, you're longer, or oh, I think your legs are taller, or your head looks big today. But the dramatic growth rate will come to like really slow down. And when that happens, that's when you wake up, you put the puppy out, they come back in, you offer them their breakfast, and instead of eating their food, they go and get a toy. And that is when people panic. And it's just showing you, it's their body's way of telling you they don't need as much food. And so it's your job to dial it down and feed them less. So while they're in that very fast growth phase, at first they're going to be more around 10% of their body weight per day, gradually dwindling down to maybe 4% of their body weight per day, and all of a sudden it drops. And you just have to recognize that that's what's happening. And then you kind of fiddle around with it. Try cutting the amount that you're feeding them in half. There will be times when they're hungrier. It kind of depends on what type of training you're doing with them at that point. Maybe they're doing really active training, or maybe the weather has improved depending on when you get your puppy. They might be expending more energy, and there might be days where they're really just not that hungry. Maybe you used a lot of treats in training class. And so you just have to pay attention to what they're telling you about what they want to eat.
I want to interject this one thing. This is something that was common that I would get reported back to from puppy families as the puppy was growing. When they were still in the earlier months and the growth rate hadn't slowed quite yet, I would get concern from the puppy parent that they just didn't seem like they wanted to eat their raw food anymore. Do not assume that they all of a sudden don't want raw. It couldn't, like most of the time, there wasn't enough variety being offered. It was the same thing every day, even if it's a blend of raw food that has all sorts of different foods in it and 3 different proteins in it. You cannot feed the same thing every single day. You shouldn't. And puppies do get bored. I mean, I've had that happen a handful of times. So if it's earlier in the puppy's development and they kind of seem like they're not wanting their food, either you're feeding them too often and they need to go further spread apart, or make sure that you're really giving that variety, because they could just be getting bored of what you're feeding them if you're only feeding them, 1, 2, 3 different things. Like they need a variety. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and along the way while they're young, that's also a good time to start introducing table scraps. So if your puppy doesn't come with an iron gut, you should build one in. Basically, you should, because dogs are carnivores, but they're scavengers, and so you should build an iron gut into that puppy. It should be a situation where if food, okay, not something toxic, but if food falls on the floor, if the puppy pounces on the food and eats it, it should not mean a trip to the ER. If you're chatting with your neighbor and you turn around and your neighbor's kid is feeding the dog the last part of their sandwich, it should not be a trip to the ER. And so one way that you build in that tolerance is by feeding a whole array of different good quality table scraps. Assuming that you eat a good diet, then you should be able to share a variety of foods with your dog.
So next, let's talk about, this is super important, non-toxic preventatives. This is probably one of the bigger topics that we get from clients or people online that are asking questions, is they want non-toxic prevention. And there absolutely is non-toxic prevention for anything that you would need. So everything from immunizations, we've talked about using homeopathy for immunizations. That is a non-toxic preventative that you can build immunity into your puppy. There's natural flea and tick products that you can use for puppies. There's non-toxic pet tags, chemical-free pet tags that they can wear. There are high-quality essential oil-based sprays. Once they've reached 6 months of age, you can start giving them garlic. That is an excellent parasite prevention and good for their health. So that's another great option. Non-toxic flea and tick is what is going to get you to heartworm preventative, because if you keep mosquitoes off your dog, that is heartworm prevention. So you don't have to do an extra thing. There are things out there specifically to address preventing heartworm that are herbal. You could certainly do something like that. In our experience, really for me, all the puppies I've raised, my own personal dogs, I just am really diligent about keeping mosquitoes off my dogs, and then I don't worry about heartworm.
Right. It's, I think, easier to repel than to, deal with trying to keep every mosquito off your dog.
Correct. So there are definitely non-toxic preventatives that you can put in place right away for your puppy, and know that they are being protected without the chemicals.
There's also natural ways to deworm them if they do turn out to have parasites. So, really,
Or deal with fleas.
everything can be done pretty much without chemical intervention. I also look at the structure of puppies a lot. So when I have puppies in my office, I look at their legs. Are they straight? Are they designed the way that breed of dog is supposed to look? Are they going to be functional? And some little dogs, I was looking at a picture today of, because I was looking at pictures of Australian Shepherds online. And so one of them was a mini Australian Shepherd with like the eyes that were doing the thing.
Oh, going outward?
Yeah, fix that. Fix that.
Cranial sacral is good
That's
for
what
that.
craniosacral therapy is for. And so any laxity in the joints, granted, when puppies are very young, they do kind of have the body tone of a stuffed animal. But at some point, they should be standing up on their legs. Their legs should be straight and even. Look out for those sloppy sitters. So for one thing, if your puppy is a sloppy sitter, never ask them to sit on a slippery floor. That's going to encourage poor posture. Take them to your animal chiropractor. Take them to your animal massage therapist so that you don't have changes in the structure, changes in the skeleton, changes in the symmetrical nature of the musculature, essentially so that your puppy grows up balanced, so that you don't have to deal with these problems later on because the puppy grew up using one side of its body more than the other or not sitting correctly. And so I look at those things. I use a lot of collagen supplements with puppies, and I definitely refer a lot to massage therapists and chiropractors, probably more massage therapists for those kinds of issues. So you want a massage therapist or a chiropractor who's familiar with their role in dealing with these issues.
And really, just to kind of double down on something that you mentioned, creating those non-slip surfaces for them to walk on, whether it's floors or stairs, is super, super, super important. I have had puppy families put temporary carpet treads on their indoor steps. Even sometimes deck stairs can be a little bit slippery. So just put something down, and if it's just kind of a big open floor that tends to be relatively slippery, get some area rugs and runners so that they're not slipping all the time. That's what messes up their hips and their, all that kind of stuff. So really making sure that the surfaces that they're walking on have good traction to them.
Right. Because I know people always think it's funny when you throw the ball down the hallway and the dog runs down the hallway and wipes out at the end. Yeah, that is not good for them. If you see it happen, take steps to either say, okay, kids, no playing ball with the dog in the hallway, or put down a runner.
Yep. So let's talk about training for a second. And I think socialization goes hand in hand with this. This is so important. I don't care if you have a tiny Chihuahua or, a big Mastiff puppy. Every puppy should go through training, and every puppy needs to be properly socialized. I will say, socialized does not mean bring it to every house and every person, around every child, around every other dog, every dog park. That's not what we're saying. Proper socialization is when you put the puppy in different environments with a trusted dog that is well-mannered, that is well-trained, that you've got an experienced dog owner, that a negative situation is not going to happen, because as those puppies are growing, it takes one bad experience at the wrong time and you have just imprinted something you don't want to imprint on that puppy, that no matter what you try, you may never be able to undo, because it's at that stage of development. So doing things appropriately. And again, back to letting your puppy settle in. We all want to make sure we get the training started early, but don't try and do it too early, right? There's a tremendous amount that you can do with your puppy on your own at home. Puppy Culture is great for this. That was the program that I used to raise my puppies. They have great information for puppy owners, not just the breeders, on things that you can do with your puppy to train and get them acclimated and explore different things. Appropriate fitness at different ages. They have a fitness booklet. So I highly recommend that you check out the Puppy Culture website, because especially also as naturally reared puppies, this is something that's really helpful if you're still, maybe you've tried to find a trainer that aligns with your belief system, but you haven't quite landed there yet. You're still capitalizing on all of these different stages of the puppy's development without necessarily needing to bring them to training yet. Don't miss those crucial windows to be working with them.
Right. Up until about 16 weeks, puppies are in a very malleable frame of mind. And so that's where you really want to introduce new things. And think about new things that could be scary. So motorcycles, snow blowers, the vacuum cleaner.
Garbage trucks.
Yeah, pots and pans, smoke alarms. And also walking on different surfaces, going to new places. So this doesn't mean that you let your puppy get mobbed by a horde of children, or let everybody hold your puppy. You want to keep control of them so that they're handled with care. And you can tell people, this is how you can pet my puppy. And if you have a sense that it's getting to be too much, then back away. It's your job to advocate for your puppy. If you're outside with your puppy and you're taking a walk down the sidewalk and somebody comes up with a dog that is not under their control and says, can my dog meet your puppy?
No.
Maybe the answer is no. And it's okay to scoop them up and say, not right now.
Yep, kind of take that protective role.
Yeah, and something else that is really important, depending on where you live and what time of year you get your puppy. If you get your puppy coming into winter and you live in a place where that's not when thunderstorms happen, go on YouTube or wherever, and I think there's an app that does this as well. Find a thunderstorm and play it for them frequently. Fireworks, anything that could be scary if you don't have access to it. If you don't know anybody who has a Harley Davidson, find motorcycles on YouTube or wherever and play those noises for them so that they can get used to them.
I was just about to bring that up, so I'm glad you brought that up. That was a huge part of Puppy Culture, of what we did with our puppies before they went home. And that was actually part of my family interview process. I would ask, is there any abnormal noises where you live? Are there trains? Is there, a lot of construction equipment? Is there, right? Like those kinds of things. One person was a hunter. And so we wanted to make sure that the puppies were exposed to those noises so that wasn't, that we were starting to make sure to head off fear from that puppy by doing that. So what I would encourage everybody to do, there is absolutely an app. I believe it's called Pup School, but I will find it for sure and link it below. And it has a variety of noises. And so what we would do with our puppies, with our litters when we had them, is the minute that we were introducing regular food, which was raw goat milk, at a low volume, we would start playing different sounds. And so they're doing like the greatest thing in the world to them, which is eating. And we're playing these noises. By the time they leave us, they could care less about fireworks. They could, we did a lot on the front end to really try and head that stuff off at the pass. So if that is something that I would encourage everybody to keep doing when they bring a puppy home, create those really valuable, positive scenarios. And make sure you start with a low volume and figure out the threshold, because you don't want to overwhelm and like shoot yourself in the foot. But that is such a valuable thing. And everybody, talks about fear of fireworks. This is when you fix that. You fix that before it's a problem. And this is a really good way to do that in those very first weeks of their life. It really does pay in dividends.
And you do have a limited amount of time to get this done.
Yep.
At about 16 weeks, they start to go into a more fearful stage. Things that were easy, all of a sudden they're a battle. Their noises stress them out more. Everything stresses them out more. And then at some point soon after that, adolescence starts to happen when your dog doesn't want to listen to you anymore. And the come when you call kind of breaks a little bit and you have to go back to training. Because they're going to go through these stages. I think adolescence through probably a year and a half is when most dogs get dropped off at humane societies, and typically just for poor behavior. They never got potty trained. They, turned into biters or nipped the kids too hard. And we talked about that in our previous video. Like, you're not really going to be able to train the herding out of your collie. And so training that is done early is super valuable. And a lot of it, again, is like stuff that you can do at home. You can take your puppy, find a place where there's sand and have them walk in sand, have them walk on gravel, wood mulch, grass, pavement. Otherwise, we see dogs all the time. My office is inside a pet food store. There's plenty of dogs who come in who balk at the shiny floor. And they're like, I don't know what that is, but I can't walk on it. So you have to acclimate them to these things.
So hopefully we've touched on just kind of a variety. We've hit on the most important pieces as far as kind of naturally raising a puppy. If you would like guides specifically on how to do some of these things, we've created guides in our stand store. We actually put together a bundle, which you can absolutely use for dogs at any age. But every single one of our guides does have special considerations for puppies, and we'll guide you through that as well. And so the specific digestive support that we really want to make sure is in place for the first 6 months to build that healthy gut, build that iron gut, build that immune system. All the recommendations are in the raw feeding guide for that. So really everything that you need, those 3 big hitters, we've got the immunization piece with homeopathy, we've got natural parasite prevention, and we've got a full raw feeding guide that will show you what feeding a variety looks like, how to do it, where to get your stuff, what's the feeding guidelines, what are the percentages of all the stuff. We made a very comprehensive guide to do that. Everything you need to raise that natural puppy should be in that bundle. And then obviously we're always here as a resource. If you get that bundle and you still have questions or there's more you want to know, that's what the consultations or appointments with me or the appointments with Dr. Levy are for. So we're here to be a resource for anything that you need, but definitely check out that bundle. If you're just like, how do I naturally do things? We've answered it in that bundle. So hopefully this is what you need and puts a little more in your toolkit for bringing home that puppy and doing things naturally. We will be talking next time about detoxification protocols. Detox 101 is what we're going to talk about next time, which we talked a little bit about with puppies, but there's a lot of different scenarios where you would want to be able to detox your dog. We're going to go really deep into that next time. And then we're looking forward to actually having our friend who is a animal massage therapist and bodywork specialist that we were talking about today. We'll have her on in a couple episodes. So that's kind of what's coming down the pipe. We hope that you guys had that this was informative for you and that this was helpful. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the Crunchy Carnivore.
Like, comment, and share.
Like, comment, share, subscribe.
Oh, there you go.
Yes.
That one too.
Okay. Till next time. Thank you so much for joining us. Our goal is always to encourage others to seek out the holistic approach by way of education and empowerment. You can check out our online resources at wellspringhaa.com. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, Wellspring Holistic Animal Academy, and you can also find us on Instagram at wellspring_HAA. We hope that this has been helpful and that you continue with us on your journey to holistic health for your pets. As always, we're here to be unapologetically all natural.